Penn State fans. Bob Flounders here with the one and only Daniel Gallen up in State College. And it's signing day, Daniel, but it's not the signing day the way that the recruiting calendar has changed. This is the second signing day, first Wednesday in September. There is some Penn State news that we can get to for sure. It wasn't exactly that slow of a day. Penn State fans, welcome into the Blue White Breakdown podcast. Daniel and I just heard from James Franklin, who had a signing day news conference. He also talked a little bit about the current team, and also we asked him a little bit about last year. He had some thoughts on that. There was a question about who the starting quarterback is. We'll get into that. But two other things, Daniel, that are interesting. Not only was it 2022 signing day, the second one, it was also Groundhog Day. Punxsutawney Phil, right, was today, I believe. And also James Franklin turned 50 today. So it was a pretty action-packed first Wednesday in February. Any way you want to slice it, where would you like to be in?
We should start with that. It's signing day, and I think that Penn State had everything. Hey, it is signing day. Penn State had everything pretty locked up back in December. Feels like so much longer ago than that, but back in December they signed 23 of their 24 commitments, and then we knew that the 24th was going to sign today. But then in the middle of James Franklin's press conference, they added a 25th. So
breaking news.
I think that, this signing day, obviously this used to be the main event up until they changed the calendar. Now it's December. That is kind of when everything tries to get done by. So, the guys that are out there, I think that Penn State, James Franklin wants to get his stuff done quickly. He wants to get his class together early. Doesn't want to leave too many loose ends out there, but it seems like kind of in an interesting sequence of events, they got an offensive lineman today.
All right. So you said that the expectation all along was they were going to sign somebody they had in their sights eventually from December. So let's go with him. Well, no, let's not, because Penn State fans knew about that. Let's not bury
that's Tyrese Mills, the Lackawanna safety. Penn State fans have probably read a lot about Lackawanna safeties at this point in their lives.
So let's get into. He interrupted his press conference with the news. I thought that was pretty funny. But can you tell the fans a little bit about the new addition? He's a big boy. James Franklin said he's 330 pounds and carries it well. But what can you tell us, Daniel, about him? Where's he from? How did this come together? It sounds like one of Penn State's new staff members had something to do with this. So take it away.
So it's Vega Ione or Ione. We'll call him Vega. I think that I got to off the practice.
Dennis Sutton for me. It's the same. You're having the same problem I'm having with the 5 stars. I got it.
I'll have to practice it. But Vega is a 3-star interior offensive lineman from Washington State.
Right.
He's listed at 6'4". He's listed at 320 on the recruiting services. James Franklin said that when he visited Penn State, he was 336 pounds, but looked like he weighed 295 pounds. Which, if there was a way for me to look like I weighed 40 pounds lighter, I want to know how to do that. That could make things a lot easier in life. But it is a very interesting kind of trajectory for his recruitment. Ione was a Washington commit. He committed last summer, decommitted when Washington fired Jimmy Lake in December, took a visit to Minnesota. Penn State offered in mid-January, not even a month ago. I think it was January 14th when I looked through the calendar, and that, James Franklin said kind of that at this point in the year when it comes to official visits, that I think he kind of worded it as like, you don't know if it's just a trip for someone like this or how kind of genuine the interest is, but it sounds like there was a connection. He visited Washington, then he came out to Penn State last weekend, and I guess the job that Stacey Collins, the new special teams coordinator, who has an extensive background in the western part of the United States, he played a big role. Franklin also credited Taylor Stubblefield and then obviously Phil Troutline, the offensive line coach, that they all played big roles in kind of making this commitment happen. So it's a big addition for Penn State. Obviously, we saw the issues that they've had on offensive line in recent years. Obviously, you don't really expect any of the freshmen that are in this class. There's now 4 offensive linemen. JB Nelson, the redshirt sophomore from Lackawanna College, he's already on campus. And then you have Drew Shelton, the 4-star from Downingtown West, and Malik McNeil, the 3-star from New York State. And now Ione is in that group. Obviously, these guys all have a lot of physical development to do before they can get on the field. But I think that this is kind of a really good base for offensive line, especially that now that Penn State has more offensive linemen in the fold in 2023, 2024. Dustin Hawkinsmith and I will probably talk more about that on Friday morning's episode of the Blue White Breakdown.
Nice.
I'm outlining our podcast now, working ahead a little bit. But I think that it's a good solid addition, and I think that it's kind of what Penn State needs. And I think that at this point in the cycle, they weren't looking for just anyone. They were looking for someone who could fit, and Vega Ione was the guy.
Yeah. And you talked about the news today for this guy, Stacey Collins, Boise State, correct? That was where Penn State got him from. So obviously, yeah, he does have a lot of ties to that area of the country. And Taylor Stubblefield just doing it all for Penn State somehow, factoring into this commitment. I love it. But what I wanted to ask you is, in the big picture, Daniel, though, when you go back to the weekend, Penn State's last 3 commitments, even though they're all in different classes, have all been offensive linemen, right? We're talking about one for this class, 2022, one for 2023, and one for 2024. So when Dave Jones and I did our podcast, he's not really a recruiting guy. I don't know if you're aware of that. Dave is not heavily into recruiting. I don't know if you picked up on that. So I didn't really broach that subject with him. I thought that would have just been a closed door and he would have dismissed me. But now that I have you, and I'm sure you're going to talk about it a little with Dustin, just generally, is there anything you can tell the fan base about, just generally, about the guys they added over the weekend? One of them was a Pennsylvania kid.
Yeah, I think that it's very interesting to look at how they're trying to build these classes now. When you look at 2022, the skill guys were the ones who were in the fold early. Drew Shelton was committed pretty early, but he had a little bit of a waiver between going down to IMG, coming back. There's some interest from Florida. But when you look at how they're building, especially the class of 2023, I mean, they've got 3 offensive linemen from Virginia, just from Virginia. And then there's a 4th in Mega Barnwell, who's plays tight end, but is he is mega sized. So there's the chance that he could become a tackle at the next level. So the most recent addition in the class of 2023 is Anthony Donko from Light Ridge, Virginia, which is a Northern Virginia school kind of near Dulles. It's brand new. When I saw the name and the school flash up, I was like, where is that? I've never heard of it. And then when I Googled it, it said it opened in 2020. So yeah, that explained that. And then that was Friday, and then Saturday, they added Cooper Cousins from McDowell out in Erie. And I think that's a really interesting one to watch. This means that it's the second cycle in a row that the first commit in the class could be an offensive lineman. In 2023, Mega Barnwell was first, then he decommitted. And then before he recommitted, Alex Birchmeyer, the 5-star in the composite from Northern Virginia, he committed over the summer. And so that was kind of I guess that he kind of has that first commit kind of title now. So you're building the classes from the inside out. Obviously, even if you have all these skill guys, it doesn't really mean anything depending on what you have in front of them. If you might have Drew Allar, Nick Singleton, Caden Saunders, the whole group, but if they can't do what they're good at doing, if they don't have time to do it, then it makes things hard. So I think that it's interesting. I still need to look into the 2 new guys, Donko and Cousins, and even Ione a little bit more. But I think that it's an interesting kind of way to go about this. Given kind of the dedicating these types of numbers to the spot on the roster.
Yeah. So Daniel, I just came up with this thought. When you mentioned the geography of the recruiting and where they're getting these kids to verbally commit from, true or false, is James Franklin trying to intimidate the heck out of Brent Pry?
Well, I think that they were already on this.
I know.
They're already going on
I
this.
was just looking for some angle to try and get you to throw you off a little bit.
Yeah,
Don't mess with Virginia. Don't mess with Virginia. That's what James is trying to say.
James is letting them know that he's watching them. He knows where he is.
Sending a message early. That's what they do. Shot across the bow. So Daniel, with the offensive line, and I think you can't. It's never been a sexy position, but it always has drawn the ire of the Penn State fans, and rightly so, because they just haven't had consistency or quality on the offensive line. They just haven't been able to. They've had a couple of good offensive lines recently, but he's now in his 9th year, and more often than not, they've been a little bit underwhelming. Looking at this offensive line, just on paper with Olu Fashanu, Caden Wallace, a healthy Salim Wormley, Juice Scruggs, maybe Landon Tengwall. I'm not ruling anyone else out, but early, looks like maybe those are going to be the key guys if they stay healthy. There's going to be other guys that contend, and they might not all start, but all those guys are going to play a lot, I think, in 2022. There's still no definitive news, about the Ivy League transfer portal guy, or is there? I know we talked about it last week, but is there still any movement there? James was asked if I think there was any more room at the inn during his Zoom call, and he said they were pretty much set, but I have a funny feeling they would make room for somebody like that or no.
Yeah, I mean, I think James framed it as wiggle room. So I think that, and given kind of how it seems like that they've sort of picked their spots in the transfer portal, I think that Hunter Norzad, the Cornell transfer, I think that he's still an option. And I think that given that all these schools have started up, I don't think that has necessarily that much of a rush to make that decision, because he won't be able to arrive till May. And then, according to a couple of the recruiting services, Tyler Steen, who's at Vanderbilt, he's an offensive tackle. He's in the transfer portal, and he could also potentially be an option for Penn State or another team that's looking. So I think that the movement, it's not done. I mean, even from the Penn State perspective, there's a chance that people can leave. But it is kind of a very interesting group when you look forward. I mean, the thing that stands out to me is the tackle position, that a lot of these guys that are coming in, more higher ranked guys, are kind of interior guys.
Yeah.
Drew Shelton, I think, is a tackle. Malik McNeil is a tackle, but both of them are going to they're going to have some development to do. Obviously, I think Shelton is further ahead than McNeil, who is 6'7", 335. I think that he's going to come in as kind of a raw piece of clay for Phil Troutline, whereas Shelton will be a little bit more refined. But you look at JB Nelson can be an interior guy. Ione today is an interior guy. And then you look at that 2023 class. Alex Birchmeyer is interior. Joshua Miller is interior, which leaves, whether Mega Barnwell could play tackle, or how kind of Anthony Donko develops. So it's an interesting group. Obviously that it's one of those things that, you kind of don't notice it unless there are some issues. And it's been pretty noticeable for a lot of James Franklin's tenure.
Mm-hmm. Let's move to the other side of the ball with regard to recruiting. And I was just thinking, when you're a JUCO from Lackawanna County Community College, and you're a safety, and you're following in the footsteps of Jaquan Brisker and Jair Brown to Penn State. On the one hand, it's good because obviously Penn State wouldn't take a safety from Lackawanna if they didn't think they could be really good. On the other hand, Daniel, though, that's a pretty high bar. That's a pretty high bar to come in if you're the expectation level, because the fans, it's not like the fans know anything about, what they did at Lackawanna. They just see kids that are similar in size to Brisker and Brown. And it's just, they can't all be grand slam home runs. But maybe, though, this guy is in that category. Maybe he's an athlete that Penn State wisely saw, a year or two ago that really liked. But what can you tell us about the latest JUCO defensive back from Lackawanna?
Yeah, so Tyrese Mills has been committed since last May. He was supposed to sign in December, but I think there was some red tape, some paperwork that needed to get finished up. So he signed today, and he'll arrive later this year on campus. James Franklin kind of mentioned that he wished that Mills could be on campus now to kind of get that extra time, which, given the fact that they have to replace a starter at safety, that could have given him a leg up. But I think Mills is an interesting prospect, 6'1", 205, I believe. So you have some size to work with. And I think that kind of fits the template of the defensive backs that Penn State recruits. Obviously, given that Mills has been in Lackawanna for a while, I think that he's bulked up a little bit more. I mean, usually these guys come in and it's like 6'1", 180. So to have him a little bit more physically developed, I think is good. I actually remember watching him play at Northeast High School in Philadelphia when I was covering high schools down there in 2016 and 2017, and he was a rangy center fielder who could make some things happen. He was kind of around the ball a lot, and he was coached by Deion Barnes at Northeast. I think Barnes 1 year was a defensive assistant and then became the defensive coordinator. And that's a high school program that has a lot of talent. Ken Talley, the 4-star edge rusher, is also coming up from Philly. So I think that Mills will have the chance to come in and do something. I think that defensive back is one of the few positions where you can really rotate guys in. Obviously, you run some risk with that, like we saw with some of the rotations, especially late in that Michigan game last year. But he's someone where he can get that playing time. He'll be able to compete with Keaton Ellis, Jalen Reed. And then there's a lot of all those other freshman safeties who are coming in. And given that that's a position where Penn State was hit hard in the portal with Enzo Jennings and Tyler Rudolph, I mean, I think Mills will come in and he definitely can be a special teams contributor. And they can kind of go from there with kind of his on-field ability.
Yeah. It's the Blue White Breakdown podcast. Daniel Gallen and Bob Flounders talking midweek signing day. The second signing day is kind of in the books. We just heard from James Franklin, talked with us for a little bit more than a half an hour. He was asked about a lot of things. So I guess at some point he was going to be asked this question. I think he answered it pretty much the way you and I thought he would answer it, but he was asked about Sean Clifford and his status as Penn State's starting quarterback going into 2022. I'm just paraphrasing, but I think that James answered it exactly the way that he always answers these kinds of questions. What was your takeaway? I know you wrote something on PennLive for it, but he doesn't, he's got, the room is a 6th-year quarterback is going to be 24 in July. A second-year quarterback who, really didn't play football in 2020 and only got a little bit of run in the Rutgers game last year, and 2 really talented January enrollees that, a lot of people are excited about. Obviously, Drew Allar is the guy, but James has made it pretty clear that the athleticism that Beau Pribula of Central York brings to the table, Daniel, he's definitely not going in as a long shot in the minds of the Penn State coaching staff. I think Mike Yursa said something similar down in Tampa at his press conference. But James was asked about Sean Clifford and his status. I know a lot of Penn State fans are hoping they're going to do something different, but it sure sounds like it's really Sean Clifford's job, and it always has been Sean Clifford's job. And unless something happens dramatically, to start the season, it will remain Sean Clifford's job at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, I think that James Franklin really answered it down the middle. He said that Sean is our returning starter, and but there is going to be competition. Mm-hmm. But even though there is competition, it is really hard to beat someone out who's been a starter for a couple of years. So I think that that's kind of the thing that all coaches like to say. They like to say that, like there's competition at all positions. Everyone's going to compete. But I think that the reality from, our experience covering teams at all levels is that if there's an incumbent, they're likely going to be the guy unless there's something, dramatic happens. And I think too, we talked about this, I think earlier after with the Big Ten kind of moving the schedule around where you've got week 1 at Purdue and you've got week 3 at Auburn. So, do you trust Christian Veilleux? Do you trust Drew Allar? Do you trust Beau Pribula to go into those places and start from the jump? I think that's a pretty heavy lift. And it's just going to be hard to get these guys playing time. You're really looking at those Ohio and Central Michigan games as kind of the place to cut them loose and get them their time. So, the question was going to come. And I'm sure we'll hear more about how Allar and Pribula are progressing as we get closer to March and real practice starting. James played it pretty down the middle, I thought, with you can read between the lines and get to the conclusion that right now, Sean Clifford's number 1 on the depth chart.
Yeah, I think if you're a Penn State fan, that answer shouldn't. That answer should have been what you expected to hear from James, and that's what he needs to say. But once we get him for spring practice, I think the more telling question and answer would be, James, given that you really struggled when Sean Clifford was hurt last year, and you really didn't, your presumed number 2 really wasn't the guy at Iowa. You have these young quarterbacks. How are you going to get them more reps, whether it's in spring or in August, especially because you have a quarterback with all this experience that maybe, he needs some work, but he doesn't need, I don't know how much work he needs in April. I really just don't know if it's maybe more valuable to back off with him and then see what you have a little bit, at least for a pecking order, Daniel, in April. And then if there's no way you think that the young guys are ready, then you got to go back to what you did. You give Sean, 85% of the reps for the first team, but you still have to have the second guy. You still have to know who your second guy is going to be, for 2022. And I just think they have to figure out a better way to go about identifying that, because I just think that last year had to have been a learning experience for James and Mike Yurcich, because they just kind of assumed that Roberson was going to be the guy. And then when he was in there, he clearly wasn't the guy. And Veilleux could do some more things, even though he was a much younger player. So that's my hope. My hope is if you want Sean to be the starter at the beginning of the year, that's fine. But you better know who your number 2 guy is, and he better be ready to play and be able to kind of compete and keep Penn State in games.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the quarterback position, that the quote unquote position battle to watch isn't for the number 1 job. I think that you can pretty, write it down in erasable pen at this point. That we'll see Clifford in week 1. I think that you have to look at the number 2 quarterback job with Veilleux, Allar, and Pribula, because that's kind of where the battle to be the number 1 in 2023. That's kind of what I feel like that the quarterback situation is this year. Obviously, Penn State has guys that want to win now, and they have talent that can win now. But at the same time, and I think someone like Mike Yurcich probably needs to win now. But you look at kind of the trajectory of the program is that, you kind of know what you're going to get out of Sean Clifford. So you need to figure out what you're going to have in 2023 and kind of what changes you're going to need to make there. So I think that that'll be interesting. And I do think that Drew Allar's status is going to be, James Franklin hasn't had a 5-star in a quarterback in a long time. So I think that dynamic is going to be interesting to watch, and kind of how you manage that, because that's the other thing, is that you want to get all of these guys to 2023 as well. So I think the number 2 quarterback job, I mean, that's kind of that's the real battle at the quarterback to watch this year. I mean, I think that, and then you can kind of go from there. So if you go into week 1 and Drew Allar is the backup, then you're like, okay, that means that he has gotten ahead of Veilleux, and you would assume that the gap between Clifford and, the gap is smaller between Allar and Clifford than is between Veilleux and Clifford. And you just kind of go from there, and you can kind of, put together some data points to kind of figure out where exactly everyone stands. And then once you get to the second half of the season, when things are really starting to shake out, then then maybe that's where something can happen.
So I don't think we're ever going to know. I think Penn State might know. I don't think we're ever going to know the true identity of the backup quarterback, because remember, there's no depth charts anymore, and he is just he will continue to tap dance around this until he absolutely has no choice but to, unless it's a performance issue or unless Sean gets hurt, I think he's going to try and keep a lid on this. But it's unfortunate, but I also think that big picture, Daniel, young, potential Penn State quarterback prospects are going to watch this play out, and they're not going to come to Penn State if they think there's no chance a young quarterback could ever get a fair shake. So I just hope that James realizes that there is the 2022 season start, there is the 2022 season finish, and there's also the future to think about when you're trying to evaluate Clifford, Christian Veilleux, who's a talented kid, and these 2 young quarterbacks, because he has never really in his history at Penn State pulled like the incumbent. Like, he briefly pulled Sean Clifford for like a half of the Nebraska game and half of the Iowa game, and put Will Levis in, but then he yanked Will and gave the job back to Sean. Tommy Stevens got hurt, and that's the only reason I think Sean probably got the job in 2019. But McSorley was the guy. Hackenberg was the guy. It would be nice to see, if you're a future potential Penn State quarterback, James be able to kind of pull the trigger if he thought maybe the starter wasn't really getting the job done or the way that they wanted it to be done. So I just think, after this is 9 years of this, so I think that there's a lot that goes into this quarterback picture. And I think you make a great point about Mike Yurcich, because if they go another season without scoring 30 points a game, 30 points in a Big Ten game, it really doesn't. If you're Mike Yurcich, you're going to probably be out, because there's no way that's going to be the standard at Penn State to go 9 Big Ten games and not score 30 points on offense. So he's got his interest to look at. James has got to look at, the big picture, the current season coming off a 7-6 season. And these young quarterbacks have to look at their best interests too. So I think it's a fascinating year. And I would really be surprised if he handled it exactly like he's handled it in the past. I think there's going to be some changes in how they get their quarterbacks evaluated and how they get them ready to play. So at least I hope so. But he doesn't have to release a depth chart anymore. So we're not going to know until it's, the next guy's coming into the game. So that's to me really the interesting thing. And the fan base is really, I think, in their minds, I just think that Sean Clifford's on a short leash in their minds. So we'll see how that plays out. And maybe Sean will have a great year. Maybe you'll be like Kenny Pickett and go from just okay numbers, and then he's going to have a breakout. But that would surprise me. I don't know if it would surprise you.
Yeah, I think the bowl game, it's kind of your last impression.
Yes.
I think that Clifford didn't leave a good last impression.
No.
I think that when he announced in mid-December that he was coming back, obviously there was some sentiment that was kind of like, can he move on? Can we get on to the next thing? But I think that it was pretty tempered in terms of we don't have to get someone out of the transfer portal. We can, we'll have this bridge to 2023 and the young guys. But then after the Outback Bowl, I think that performance kind of, I think it alarmed. I think it kind of alarmed people. I mean, I didn't think, I expected him to look look better than that. But I will say, when it comes to switching starting quarterbacks, sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for. When I was a student reporter at Maryland, one of our favorite stats was that I think they went, maybe it was either when I started there, it was like 4 years. So I think by the time I left, it was like 6 or 7 years. The number of years they went without having the same starting quarterback for every game in a season, that they just had, I think, 6 or 7 years where, whether it was injury, whether it was guys not being good, that they just never had, they just couldn't find the guy that they could get in and stick with. And so obviously, if you have someone who's better than Sean Clifford, you have to do that for what's better than the team, what's good for the team. But you do kind of have to, there is something good that comes from having stability, and kind of having and knowing that, okay, we can game plan going in with the same guy every week. So that's, it's tough. I think that Penn State is kind of in a tough position right now, but I do think that going in, I mean, you know what the baseline is with Sean Clifford, and that gives you somewhere to go from.
Daniel, for a brief instant there, when you were talking about your college experience, I thought you said you spent 7 years at Maryland. I was like, this guy John Belushi, like I didn't know that he was this crazy of a person. I'm like, you 7 years in college? But I was, while you were talking, like, okay, now I was like, oh my God, if you spent 7 years in college, you must have been a party animal. But I got it now. I just misunderstood you at the start, so I just wanted to clear that up. Unless you did my favorite 7 years at Maryland.
No, it was only 4, but I always thought it was funny that CJ Brown, who was the starting quarterback I covered my senior year, he was a 6-year guy in college because of injuries. He's a Western PA kid, but it was just kind of funny to me that, oh, he was here for a year before I got to college, and he is there for a year after I leave. And I think about everything, like college felt really long to me. So I don't know, it's pretty funny. And I'm sure there's some other Penn State grads that have a similar experience with Sean Clifford now coming back for a 6th year.
Absolutely. All right, one quick personnel note. We'll get to this just to clear it up. Bryce Mostella, James Franklin was asked about reserve defensive lineman on Penn State's roster. He's currently not on the roster now. I think you wrote a little bit of something about this. I guess there was something that happened over the weekend. James couldn't really talk about a lot, but is there anything you can kind of say to maybe to the fans about his status?
Yeah, Franklin said that he's not currently enrolled at Penn State because I think he medically withdrew before the end of the last semester because he was having mental health issues that led to him being hospitalized in November. He said it was due to it stems from trying to gain weight to play the defensive end position and being unable to do so, and not feeling supported and not really having the support of the coaching staff as he was going through that and having mental issues. So he wrote over the weekend that he medically withdrew and then couldn't re-enroll. So James Franklin confirmed that Bryce Mostella is not enrolled at Penn State, even though he is still listed on the roster, redshirt sophomore defensive end from Michigan, and he's still listed in the student directory. So we have some stories about that on PennLive. It's a little bit easier to read about than to talk about.
Yeah, I got it. Some people, though, all they want to do is see our faces, Daniel. They don't even want to read PennLive. They just wait for this midweek video. You and me, you and I don't even know what their English is on that. But I mean, they want to get it. They want to hear it from you, or they want to hear it from me. So that's why I asked it. I didn't want to forget about Bryce Mostella. Hopefully things work out for him. Like, as you said, a reserve defensive lineman from Michigan. And hopefully things work out for him. Wish him all the best. I don't know if his career is done at Penn State, but certainly wish him well. All right. You and Dustin are going to be back later in the week to talk. I know you're working on your outline now, but I have a funny feeling a lot of it's going to be recruiting, but I never know with you.
I'm going to have to brush up on my offensive line film.
You spent 7 years at Maryland. I don't know what's going on in that big head of yours. Who knows? Have you spent 7 years? I can't believe it. But no, that's not true. You didn't. But it was great talking to you. I know you've been busy the last couple of days. We will be back to chat next Wednesday, post signing day, post James Franklin birthday, post Groundhog Day. Hopefully the weather will be as nice next week at this time as it is right now, because it's in the mid to high 30s right now, and it feels pretty great. So you hang in there with Penn State basketball, and we'll talk to these guys next week.